So as we just saw, using pivot tables, we can do some pretty sophisticated analyses relatively easily, and we're going to get there. As you recall, what I showed is that we had a summary of average salary by sex by state. So that was multiple things going on at once to get the kind of summary that we wanted. We're going to get to that really soon, but first we're going to start with simple summaries so that you can get comfortable with pivot tables and see how they work. That's what we're going to do here. We're going to start working in our census data, and we're going to add in a pivot table where we can look at all of the census data and just look at the distribution of records that are divided between males and females. Our first steps here are almost identical to adding in a table of any kind. We're going to insert, but rather than inserting a table, we're going to insert a pivot table. We see a very familiar interface here. We see Excel asking us if we have the right data range selected, and we do. We want all of our data represented in this data table, in this pivot table. And Excel recommends that we start our pivot table in a new spreadsheet. I think this is a good idea. It separates it out from our data. It ensures that we're not changing our data in any way. And pivot tables can get pretty big, and having them work on a separate spreadsheet I find much more convenient. So we'll go ahead and do this. We'll say yes to all of that. Here is our new spreadsheet that has our pivot table in it. I'm going to go ahead and rename this spreadsheet and just call it pivot table sex, because that's what we're going to do. Is we're going to start with a summary of sex in this data set. What you see on the right over here is our list of pivot table fields. Soon we'll start to see parallels between this window on the right and the windows we use to select data for charts. But right now, the most important thing is starting to get to the point where we understand what's going on here. The first thing we see is we see a list of all of our columns, all of our variable types in here. We know we're interested in sex. What I'm going to do in this case is going to drag sex down and put it into the row location. And you see that the pivot table on the left updates with every action we take. This is a really valuable tool because you can actually try things out and see how it changes the report that you're generating in your pivot table. Right now this looks good. We have a row for female and we have a row for male. And what we want to do is we want to find out how many of the people in our data set fit into each of these categories. The way we're going to do this is we're also going to use sex as a value. It is not only a category, but what we want to do is we want to count up in numbers how many people fit into each of these. And by default, Excel has already done this for us. It anticipates that we might first want to count up the number of records that fit into each of these categories. And we see, as we might expect, it's about a 50-50 split of the 500 data records that we have in this spreadsheet. But maybe we want to know exactly what those percentages are. Maybe we want this count, but maybe we want to see it represented in percentages. We can do this also by using the pull-down menu here and choosing Value Field Settings. We get a new window that lets us change how this particular data is represented. Right now we have count of sex, and we can see, we can sum, we can average, we can do other functions as well, just like when we were using a regular table in the last section. But for this, we're going to use the Show Values As tab. And what we want to do is we want to change this to a percentage. We can change it to percentage of grand total or column total. In this case, it doesn't matter because we don't have other variables represented. But in the future, we'll see how this might affect the percentages that we see. Once we select this and we select OK, then our counts are immediately converted into percentages. So now we know we're pretty close to a 50-50 representation of the two sexes in this data set, but we're off by a few percentage points, as we might expect just by random chance. And think about how quickly we were able to do this. We did not have to type in any functions or equations, and we're able to do this on a separate spreadsheet, and our original data are still over here on our census data sheet, completely unchanged. We're just referring to them as we're working in this pivot table. As you can see, this is a quick and easy tool that can enable you to do a lot of the things we've been working on relatively quickly now. I'm going to give you an opportunity to practice this skill, and then we'll start adding in additional variables so we can get to more sophisticated analyses.